She wasn't trained for this mission. Could a forgotten hangar crew member change everything? In fact, she wasn't even supposed to touch a cockpit. Just another name on a list assigned to the hangar out of obligation. But when the pilots froze and the base fell silent, she made a choice that would uncover a forgotten military secret. Welcome to Graceful Valor Stories. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories that honor the quiet ones who rise when it matters most, feel free to subscribe. The airfield stretched flat and silent beneath the heavy morning sky. A gray haze blurred the horizon where hangars loomed like half-buried giants, unmoving and cold. The tarmac shimmered slightly, not from heat, but from the sheer weight of protocol and expectation. Jet engines in the distance spun lazily, their roar still resting in anticipation, waiting for orders that had yet to arrive. Eva Vega moved without sound, her boots softened by the dust baked into the ground. She wore the same jumpsuit as the others, the same standard issue patch on her shoulder, the same dull shade of green. The only thing that set her apart was how invisible she had become. People passed her without looking. Names were exchanged around her, never with her. In the flight deck assignments, she was listed as Crew Reserve 2, a designation that meant use only if every other option has failed. She crouched under the belly of a grounded Falcon reconnaissance jet, her fingers methodically checking hydraulic pressure seals. Her eyes, calm and unbothered, traced the familiar contours of the landing strut. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The work responded to her silence better than it ever had to orders. Overhead, a pair of junior technicians cracked jokes as they ran diagnostics from the cockpit. One of them shouted a correction to the other and then leaned down from the access ladder. "Hey, Vega. You sure this seal is good? I thought it flagged red last week." Ava stood and gave a slow nod. "It was replaced. I logged it." The tech gave a half shrug. "All right, just checking." Then he turned back to his partner. "Looks like I was right." She didn't correct him. Inside the operations tent, Lieutenant Brain paced in front of a wall of flight schedules and incoming satellite telemetry. The tension in his voice reached through the tent's flaps and carried to the hangar. The situation was changing rapidly across the border. Civilian flights were grounded. Military aircraft were reprioritized. Pilots were being cycled in and out based on clearances that no one fully understood. Ava watched from behind a support column. She held a small data pad in her hand, thumb hovering over an unread system report. From the way Brain shouted into his comms, she could tell none of the junior command had answers. The older brass had gone quiet, waiting for orders that might not come at all. Her gaze drifted to Hangar 3. A craft with a stripped call sign sat alone, covered in tarpaulin. It hadn't flown in years. The paint was faded, and the systems inside would likely protest at the first sign of ignition. Still, something about its profile pulled at her, not in nostalgia, but in recognition. Will this forgotten craft hold the key? She turned back to the jet she was servicing and resumed her checks. Quiet hands, steady breath, eyes low. That was how you stayed useful without drawing too much attention. Noticed people got asked questions. Unnoticed ones got left to their work. Later that afternoon, a ceremony was held for Lieutenant Collins, recently promoted after a successful sortie. The crew gathered, clapped politely, and drank weak coffee from metal cups. Ava stood in the back, hands folded behind her. Her name hadn't been mentioned in the report, even though she'd performed the pre-flight alignment that likely saved Collins' landing gear from locking midair. She didn't expect credit. It was better that way. As the crowd dispersed, Sergeant Ralph passed by and gave her a brief nod. That was the most anyone had offered in weeks. Back inside the maintenance bay, a new recruit named Lennox wandered near Ava's station. "You Vega?" he asked, uncertain. She nodded. "Brain told me to report here. Said I'd be learning from your logs." She motioned to the terminal. "Diagnostics sync every hour. Start there." Lennox hesitated. "They say you used to be on a flight crew." Her hands paused just slightly, then resumed tightening a coupling. "A long time ago." Lennox scratched the back of his neck. Well, anyway, just wanted to say hi. She didn't answer. After a few more seconds, he left. The silence returned familiar and clean. That night, a red warning flashed on the central alert tower. A reconnaissance aircraft in northern airspace had experienced a systems failure. It was losing altitude and had less than an hour of fuel. The pilot on board was wounded but alive. Rescue response was being delayed due to restricted airspace and uncertain clearance codes. Inside the strategy room, voices clashed in quiet arguments. No certified pilot on base was cleared for a launch. The last emergency override had been used during a diplomatic escort 2 weeks prior. None of the command staff were willing to authorize an unsanctioned takeoff without written orders. Ava stood at the edge of the corridor, her back pressed to the wall. Through the narrow window in the door, she saw the command team freeze, unable to make a decision that could cost lives or careers. One of them muttered something about regulations. Another mentioned backup flight crews. Someone else laughed bitterly. "She's hangar crew," they said. "We don't even have backup to the backup, unless you want to hand a bird to the maintenance ghost." She turned away from the door before they noticed her. Down in the lower storage lockers, away from cameras and scheduled shifts, Ava opened a small steel drawer near the back wall. Inside was a folded patch, dark gray with a silver triangle, a faded insignia barely visible along the edge. She looked at it for a long time. In her locker was a photograph. It showed a younger version of herself, standing with 3 other pilots in full flight suits. Her face was sharp, intense, her posture straight. The others had name tags, medals, distinctions. Hers was blank. The photo had a burn mark through the corner like it had been pulled from a fire. She returned it to the small envelope it came in and locked it away again. In the hangar, the lights flickered slightly, a power loop, probably linked to the radar sweeps in progress. Everyone was on edge. The next morning, the base commander issued a soft alert. The recon pilot had activated his beacon again. He was alive, but drifting toward restricted terrain. Still, no one was authorized to fly. By mid-morning, the chatter among personnel was laced with resignation. Someone joked that they should just flip a coin and send a drone with a prayer. Another said, maybe Vega should take a crack at it since she seemed to be everywhere and nowhere at once. Ava walked past them without slowing. She held a data chip in her hand and entered Hangar 3. The tarp on the old aircraft rustled as she pulled it back. Beneath the dust was a frame built before the last major doctrine change, a Falcon 9 variant customized for silent entry and low EM signatures. It had been officially listed as non-operational, but Ava knew better. She climbed into the cockpit, the control panel lighting up under her touch. A soft beep echoed from the interface. She slid the chip into a reader slot and waited. A screen lit up. System authentication in progress. She placed her thumb on a small scanner hidden under the throttle. ID confirmed. A brief flicker. Then in red text, Protocol Falcon Loader. Status dormant since 17 years. Override authorized. She stared at the screen. She didn't speak. Outside, the noise of the base continued. Orders being repeated, vehicles humming, jet engines idling with nowhere to go. Inside the cockpit, Ava leaned back against the seat. Her eyes closed for one brief moment, then opened again. The aircraft's instruments came to life. Target coordinates loaded automatically. The system hadn't forgotten. Neither had she. She didn't take off. Not yet. Instead, she powered everything down, slid the canopy back into place, and exited quietly, resetting the hangar lock as she left. Back at the maintenance bay, her name had been temporarily reassigned to an equipment log error, a clerical oversight that no one had yet corrected. She sat on a low stool and began logging system feedback from the diagnostics panel. The screens in front of her scrolled with data. Fuel compression, turbine calibration, flight memory from aircraft that hadn't flown in months. In the background, an officer mentioned that the recon pilot was still out there, still drifting. Ava typed in a single line on her screen. Rescue potential available. She saved the file, logged off. No one saw her leave that night. No one asked, no one thought to. She walked alone, her steps steady, her path clear. The wind picked up as she passed the hangars, carrying with it the distant rumble of an approaching storm. The runway lights blinked in soft rhythm, waiting for something that hadn't happened yet. In the shadows, the aircraft in Hangar 3 remained still. But its core system was awake again. And it remembered her. By morning, the tension had sunk deep into the concrete beneath the base. Everything felt slower, as if the entire airfield was holding its breath. Will Ava's past finally surface? Flight decks remained eerily quiet, and crews gathered in loose knots, watching the sky more than their assignments. Rumors spread faster than orders. The recon jet was still out there. The pilot was alive, bleeding and circling a stretch of air that none of the new flight maps accounted for. No one had authorization to fly, but no one wanted to say why. Ava stood beneath a half-lit access panel on the main diagnostics wall, running cable checks by hand. A small group of junior staff hovered nearby, speaking in low tones that weren't quite whispers. "They've locked down the command tent," one of them said. "Doesn't matter." Another replied, "It's been 24 hours. That pilot is gone if someone doesn't act." "What about Collins?" "He's senior now. He's on rest rotation and they're not about to risk him on a ghost signal." Then a snort. "At this point, I'd rather give Vega a shot. At least she wouldn't hesitate." Ava heard the words, but her expression didn't shift. Her hand remained steady as she traced the current through the relay wires. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. The others moved on, their footsteps echoing faintly across the bay. That afternoon, Lennox approached her again. His voice was softer now, not out of deference, but because the silence in the hangar demanded it. "I saw the Falcon system powered on yesterday," he said. "The old one, Hangar 3. Ava's eyes remained on the diagnostics pad. It was a test. Looked like more than that. She finally turned toward him. "Do your shift, Lennox." He nodded and stepped back, though something in his face had changed. Not fear, curiosity, maybe even belief. Ava returned to her work, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She remembered the weight of the Falcon's throttle under her hand. The glow of the screen when it recognized her. The years between then and now felt like they had folded into a single thread, pulling tight. By early evening, a new report came through the encrypted channel. The recon pilot's vitals had spiked. His craft was failing. Fuel levels were critical. His coordinates were now too close to disputed airspace. If he drifted another 20 nautical miles, it would trigger a full diplomatic response. Inside the operations tent, the junior officers were out of options. Protocols had them frozen. Higher command had yet to reply. There were whispers that orders had been scrambled intentionally, or that someone was waiting for the pilot to vanish rather than risk exposure. Lieutenant Brain paced again. His hands trembled slightly when he lifted his comb. "Still no authorization," he muttered. "I'm not signing off on anything without confirmation." Someone leaned back in their chair. "Then we're watching a man die." Outside, Ava sat in the service corridor, her back against the cold wall. She held a folded piece of paper in her hand, its edges worn and creased. It was a flight roster from years ago, dated and declassified, just enough to be forgotten. Her name had been printed there once, Pilot Loader Division. The ink had faded, but the title remained. She tucked the paper back into her pocket and stood. The hangar was dimly lit. The motion sensor slowed to catch her movement as she entered. The Falcon sat as she had left it, covered in a thin layer of dust, as if it had been waiting without complaint. She climbed into the cockpit. The screen lit up again. Recognition came faster this time. The system welcomed her with no alarm, no hesitation. Falcon loader protocol confirmed. Flight path emergency recovery mode authorization level reinstated. She sat in silence as the onboard systems recalibrated around her. The air inside the cockpit was dry, recycled, familiar. It felt like a memory made real. Outside, a red light on the flight deck began to blink slowly, unnoticed by most. She moved through pre-launch sequences without looking at the prompts. Her hands remembered the order: fuel lines, air pressure, comms override. She bypassed internal comms and routed through the old encrypted channel. The plane's AI system pinged her with one word: status. She responded with a single keystroke: active. At the far end of the bay, Lennox returned from a parts run. He froze when he saw the aircraft powered up, its external lights blinking gently in ready mode. He sprinted across the bay, nearly slipping on the polished floor. "You're not serious," he said when he reached the side of the Falcon. "You're not cleared for this." "No one is." Ava didn't look at him. "It's not about clearance anymore. Command will have you court-martialed. Only if they catch me." The engines hummed as she initialized final thrust calibrations. The old Falcon responded with less resistance than she expected. Whatever its age, it was built to obey. Lennox shook his head. "Why you?" She paused. Then she looked him in the eye for the first time. "Because I've done it before." He stepped back as the canopy slid shut. Ava keyed in the launch code. The deck doors began to open. Heavy metal plates drawing apart with a groan. The air rushed inward. The Falcon's engines roared to life. In the control room, alarms lit up in staggered panic. Unauthorized launch detected. Hangar 3. Falcon airframe. Who's in that cockpit? The monitor scrambled to identify the pilot, but the system locked, refusing to override. The protocol it was now running predated the current flight registry. Brain stared at the feed. "Is that Vega?" "She's not certified." "She's flying." The Falcon rose with startling grace, wheels lifting from the tarmac as the engines pushed it into a clean arc. The tower scrambled to initiate shutdowns, but the aircraft ignored them. The system only responded to a code buried years ago, one known only to the loader division. As the Falcon cleared the runway, its secondary signal lit up on military satellites. A forgotten signature blinked into life. The screen labeled it as Operation Falcon Loader Reactivated. The recon pilot's coordinates loaded automatically into Ava's display. She adjusted course. The Falcon moved like a creature returned to its natural environment. Every control obeyed with precision. Every turn felt like instinct. Up in the command tower, a general's voice broke through the secure line. "What the blazes is going on?" Brain swallowed hard. "It's loader, sir." Someone triggered the old protocol. "I thought that unit was decommissioned." It was, but someone forgot to erase her. In the Falcon's cockpit, Ava reached cruising altitude. The recon craft's beacon pinged weakly. She was closing the gap fast. Below, clouds stretched like sheets of steel. She remembered the last time she flew under that call sign. The mission had gone dark. Half her unit lost. The debrief sealed. Her flight record vanished. She was reassigned without explanation, buried under layers of rank and forgotten guilt. But her hands had never forgotten how to fly. She dropped altitude quickly, catching the recon plane's tail beacon. The craft was spinning slightly, one wing trailing smoke. Its pilot was conscious but fading. She could see the reflection of his visor through the side viewport. She angled the Falcon closer. "Recon 6, this is Lodestar Unit," she said calmly into the comm. "I am your recovery escort. Maintain minimal input and prepare for wing catch alignment." The pilot didn't respond, but she could see his head nod weakly. She deployed the Falcon stabilizers, locking into a maneuver once taught but rarely performed. With slow precision, she matched the recon plane's descent, pulling alongside and stabilizing its left drift. The onboard computers worked overtime to sync pitch and yaw. Inside the command center, the team watched in stunned silence. "She's catching it mid-fall," someone whispered. "No one's pulled that maneuver in over a decade," said another. "She's not just flying, she's leading." As the recon craft straightened, Ava locked a drone tether to its rear hook, giving just enough pull to redirect its fall into a shallow glide. The pilot inside slumped, safe, but unconscious. She guided both aircraft through the lower corridor, away from radar range, and toward the safe zone flagged weeks earlier in emergency planning. The Falcon led, its engines burning clean. When they touched down, the Falcon first. The recon jet followed 20 seconds later, skidding but intact. Ground crew rushed forward, stunned into action. Ava opened the canopy and climbed out. For a moment, no one moved. Then Sergeant Ralph stepped forward. He looked at her, really looked for the first time. Without a word, he raised his hand in a firm salute. A second passed. Then another crew member followed. One by one, hands lifted to their brows, saluting the woman no one had seen until today. Ava didn't smile. She simply nodded and stepped aside as medics rushed to the recon pilot. In the background, the Falcon's engines wound down, the aircraft once again still. But it would never be forgotten again. Neither would she. The sun was already low by the time the Falcon and the recon jet settled on the far end of the tarmac. Dust curled into the sky, rising behind the landing gear and dissolving into the wind. Emergency crews swarmed around the recon craft first, prying the hatch open, pulling the injured pilot out carefully. He was unconscious, but breathing, his pulse steady now that he was no longer drifting in a crippled machine. Ava stood near the Falcon, her flight suit dusty but intact. Her gloves were off, tucked into one hand. She waited in silence as the medics passed her. No one said a word. Then came the first ripple. A senior crew chief stepped out from the line of approaching vehicles. Confusion in his face giving way to something steadier. He stopped, feet together, and brought his hand to his brow in a clean salute. Ava didn't react. She held his gaze for a moment. Then a second crew member mirrored the salute. Then a third. Within moments, a line of uniformed personnel stood in quiet formation, acknowledging her without question or hesitation. It was not a celebration. It was recognition. Inside the command tower, the officers watched through the glass with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Lieutenant Brain's voice had gone quiet hours ago. Now he simply stared as reports came in from the satellite uplink and base communications. The system logs were overwhelming. Security flagged her biometric reactivation. Protocol loader had not just been triggered. It had overridden every contemporary chain of command. A young analyst turned from her station, eyes wide. "Sir, the Falcon's flight data activated something buried in archive storage. It's pulling files from the central defense server." Brain moved to her screen. Red-coded messages scrolled rapidly, all marked with legacy clearance. A name blinked in the header. Pilot Ava M. Vega Status Loader Division Reactivated Access Level Omega Bound. A request for terminal authentication sat waiting, locked behind voice and fingerprint identification. The system recognized only one signature for access. Horror. Brain reached for his headset. "Get me the Joint Operations Committee now." On the ground, Ava made her way toward Hangar 3. The Falcon rolling behind her with a light mechanical whine as it was towed. She paused at the edge of the entrance where a row of vehicles blocked off the rest of the runway. Two military police officers approached, but neither raised their voice. One of them simply handed her a communication device. A voice came through. It was clipped, authoritative, but calm. "Miss Vega, you are ordered to report to the base debrief chamber immediately." Ava turned, eyes narrowing slightly. "Under what authority?" "Yours, according to the activation logs, you now hold priority classification under Operation Loader. You're the last surviving officer of a disbanded unit. That means the protocol defaults to your discretion." She said nothing for several seconds, then handed the device back and began walking toward the operations building. The room was dim when she entered. A long table ran through the center. Several monitors displayed encrypted footage, thermal scans, and satellite overlays. Only 3 officers were present, all older, wearing service ribbons and insignia from divisions that no longer existed on the active registry. One of them stood when she entered. He had silver hair and a lined face, but his posture was crisp. "I never thought I'd see one of you again," he said. Ava looked at the table where her personnel file sat open. Photographs, mission records, psychological assessments. Many pages were redacted. "You knew we were still alive," she said. "You buried the files, but you kept the systems intact." He nodded slowly. "It was not my choice. The division was shut down by higher authority. You were reassigned for your safety. That was the official reason." "And the unofficial one?" He paused. "We found something during your last mission. A data core. Intelligence that made certain people very nervous. Your team wasn't meant to survive, but you did." Ava leaned forward. "I remember pieces. We recovered a beacon from an abandoned satellite grid. It sent coordinates encrypted with an unknown cipher. That cipher was never cracked until today." He gestured to the monitor. A blinking prompt sat open on the screen, translating layers of code from the Falcon's recent flight. Your return flight reactivated the beacon system. It fed a key into the base archives. It's linked to something called Network Shadowglass, a surveillance algorithm buried before the first global satellite treaties. Ava stared at the screen. "You mean it's still live?" "Yes. And now it's listening again." She turned toward the window, her reflection staring back. "That's why Loader was buried. Not because we failed, because we found something." The officer didn't answer. Outside, more personnel gathered around the Falcon, staring at the craft like it had flown in from another century. Its sleek lines, modified core, and encrypted hardware looked alien compared to the modern fleet. But it wasn't the machine they respected. It was the pilot. By evening, a private conference room had been prepared. Ava sat across from a panel of senior advisors, each one reviewing the data pulled from the reactivation logs. A soft hum filled the room from the ventilators overhead. One of the officials leaned forward. "You accessed the Falcon without authorization." "I did." "You violated flight protocol, bypassed every clearance level, and launched during a full operations freeze." "Yes." "And in doing so, you reactivated a dormant surveillance program that was buried for a reason." She didn't respond immediately. "I didn't plan that part," she said finally. "I just flew." Another official tapped her pen against a folder. "You were grounded after the Black Range incident." "Your file says trauma disqualification." "My file says a lot of things." "Do you deny the assessment?" "No, I remember it. I remember how we were told to extract then left behind. I remember the blackout. I remember the recovery team coming 2 days late." The room was still. "Did you know the Falcon still had the key stored in its system?" one advisor asked. "No, but it knew me. That's why it let me fly." They exchanged glances. Finally, the oldest among them nodded slowly. "Then, perhaps it's time we stop questioning your past and start preparing for what your actions have uncovered." The screen behind them flickered, revealing a data stream that stretched deep into the system. Coordinates, names, surveillance audio from satellites that shouldn't have been operational. Network Shadowglass had reactivated its full spectrum. Ava watched, her face unreadable. Later that night, she returned to the hangar. The Falcon sat in its bay, surrounded by floodlights and monitoring equipment. It had been carefully secured, but not powered down. No one wanted to risk shutting it off before the data transfer was complete. She climbed into the cockpit and closed the canopy. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the interface lit up again. This time the screen greeted her not as an unauthorized pilot but as command lead. Falcon Loader. Status operational. Command. Ava M. Vega. Mission awaiting instructions. She placed both hands on the controls and took a slow breath. The metal beneath her fingertips was warm. Familiar. Alive. Behind her, the door opened. Lennox stepped in. a clipboard in hand. He looked surprised to find her inside the cockpit, but didn't turn away. "They've cleared you," he said. "You're officially reinstated." Ava raised an eyebrow. "Not just flight ready. They're giving you back the loader designation." She looked down at the dashboard. "They didn't give it to me," she said. "They just remembered it was mine." He hesitated before speaking again. "Everyone's talking about it, about you, what you did, what you uncovered." She gave a faint nod. "It wasn't about proving anything." "I know. That's why it mattered." She looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, she saw not a new recruit, but someone who had stood close to the fire and not backed away. "Do you want to see something?" she asked. He blinked. "Sure." She reached into the side panel and activated the mission replay sequence. A 3D projection emerged from the center console, showing the flight path, the rescue alignment, and the signal sequence that had triggered the hidden protocol. Lennox watched in stunned silence as the map lit up with markers. "That's what was buried," she said. "A network that can see everything." Why was it hidden? Because power like that doesn't serve orders. It reveals them. He looked at her, then at the projection. "What happens now?" Ava sat back. "Now we decide who deserves to see it." In the days that followed, the base transformed. Security increased. Teams from Central Command arrived to assess the rediscovered protocol. Investigations were launched not into Ava, but into the missing decades of covert programs buried behind layers of misinformation. Reporters weren't allowed in. But somehow the story began to leak anyway. Whispers of a pilot who wasn't supposed to exist. A plane that should never have flown. A mission that changed everything. Ava didn't chase the attention. She didn't speak at the press briefings. She returned to her station. Same jumpsuit, same quiet footsteps. But now, when she passed the hangars, heads turned. When she entered the flight deck, voices lowered in respect. And when she looked toward the sky, it no longer felt out of reach. The stars were the same. But the silence had changed. The base was quieter now, but it was a different kind of quiet. Not the stillness of indifference, but the stillness that followed change. Doors that had once remained shut without question now paused when Ava walked by. Salutes no longer came from obligation, but from something deeper. Not awe, not fear, but recognition. Ava sat on a folding chair near the edge of the flight line, sipping coffee from a dented metal cup. The air was cool, the wind pushing softly across the tarmac. Somewhere behind her, a junior crew ran routine diagnostics on the Falcon. It no longer needed to hide. It had done what it was meant to do and now stood as a sentinel, a remnant of a time forgotten, and a signal of what had been uncovered. She watched the horizon where a thin line of gray separated the sky from the earth. Her hands rested on her knees, still and relaxed. Her posture was not rigid, not guarded. It was the posture of someone who had finally landed. Across the runway, a figure approached slowly. It was Sergeant Ralph. His stride was calm, purposeful. In his hand, he carried something wrapped in cloth. When he reached her, he stood for a moment in silence, then offered it out without a word. She took the bundle gently, unwrapping it. Inside was a flight pin. It was old, clearly worn. The metal edges dulled by time. The insignia was from a squadron that hadn't existed on any public record for over a decade. Her eyes studied it for a moment, then looked up at him. "It was my father's," Ralph said. "He flew in the early composite units. I found it last year in a box that hadn't been opened since his passing. He told me before he died that sometimes the most important pilots were the ones no one ever wrote about." Ava held the pin in her palm, then closed her fingers around it. She gave a nod, soft and deliberate. "I'll take care of it," she said. Ralph gave her a single nod and walked away. He didn't need to say anything more. The gesture had already spoken louder than any speech. Later that day, Ava was called into a briefing room where several command officials were waiting. The room wasn't formal. There were no podiums or microphones, just a long table, chairs arranged in a circle, and a digital display at the center showing the map of the region. Network shadowglass, now fully decrypted, was represented by a delicate lattice of satellite nodes and hidden relay points. The system had been dormant for years, silently gathering information without interference. No one had realized it was still functioning until Ava's activation sequence woke it. One of the analysts began the update. "We've begun cross-referencing the surveillance cache with current intel," she said. "There are anomalies in the record, patterns that suggest selective obfuscation going back at least 15 years. Someone used the system, then locked it away." Another officer leaned forward. "We're not just looking at old surveillance. We're looking at decisions that may have been made based on withheld information, whole operations, entire outcomes." Ava nodded slowly. "And now we see it all." There was a pause in the room. The general present, a man who had once been in the same chain of command that buried her flight record, cleared his throat. "What you did," he said, "was not just brave. It reminded us why we're here, why we fly, why we protect." Ava did not answer with a speech. She looked at the map again, at the glowing nodes that dotted the sky like stars reborn. "We protect the truth," she said quietly. "Even when it's inconvenient." The meeting ended without ceremony. As she stepped outside, sunlight cut across the tarmac in slanted beams. The Falcon gleamed faintly beneath its hangar lights, still being studied by a team of engineers and historians who could barely believe what they were looking at. Ava passed by them unnoticed this time, but not because they ignored her. They were focused on the aircraft and the trail it had left through the air, and that was enough. As the week passed, the base adjusted to the new reality. Ava's name returned to the active flight roster, listed now as a consulting pilot for tactical response and legacy systems. A strange title, unofficial in nature, but one that gave her full access to airspace, to archive rooms, to the things that mattered. Lennox continued to work under her shift rotation. He had changed, too. His confidence now shaped by clarity. No longer wide-eyed, no longer uncertain, he carried himself like someone who had learned the value of paying attention to the quiet voices. One afternoon, he brought her a sealed folder. Inside were copies of the recovered loader files, now declassified. Names, dates, flight patterns, mission reviews, her team's history, once erased, now written again. At the bottom of the folder was a short note written in pen. "They were always proud of you, even when no one else remembered to be." She folded the paper once, then again, and slipped it into the front pocket of her jacket. At the edge of the base, near the observation tower, a new plaque had been installed. It was small black metal with engraved lettering. It read, "In honor of the unseen, the unheard, the unremembered until they choose to rise." There was no name on the plaque. That was the point. The recognition didn't come in headlines or ceremonies. It came in the way people looked up when she entered a room. In the way they listened when she gave instructions, in the way younger crew members began asking questions that weren't just technical, but personal. How do you stay calm in the cockpit? What do you do when no one trusts you? What made you fly that day? To each question, Ava gave honest answers. Sometimes short, sometimes long, but always honest. She knew now that sharing her story wasn't about ego. It was about guidance. Someone had to carry the signal forward. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hangars, Ava stood outside with a few of the crew, watching a training flight return to base. The jet streaked low across the sky, cutting a clean path into the landing corridor. Lennox looked up from a report he was holding. "Do you miss it flying like that every day?" Ava smiled faintly. "I never missed the flying," she said. "I missed being needed." He considered that. "I think people know they need you now." She didn't answer. She watched the jet touch down, wheels kissing the runway like it had done it 1,000 times before. When the rest of the crew filtered back inside, Ava remained. The breeze had picked up again. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers brushing the flight pin Ralph had given her. The metal was warm from the sun. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the wind pass through her. Then she opened them again. Back in her quarters, a letter had arrived from Central Command. It was short. A formal note of reinstatement marked with her original loader insignia. The final line read, effective immediately, Pilot Vega is restored to active reserve with honor. She pinned the letter to the inside of her locker. Not for others to see, but for herself. Late at night, after most had gone to sleep, Ava returned once more to Hangar 3. The Falcon sat in quiet stillness. She climbed inside and activated the interface. This time, there was no need for authorization. The display opened on a blank screen, waiting. She typed in a single command. Status awaiting future deployment. Then she powered it down and sat for a long time with her hand resting on the console. Before she left, she turned to the aircraft one last time. Thank you, she whispered. Outside, the stars had begun to rise. One by one, they lit the sky above the airfield. Each point a reminder of something distant, constant, and quietly powerful. Somewhere in the world, another person was being overlooked, pushed to the background, written off because they were quiet or strange or slow to speak. Ava thought of them now, wherever they were. Perhaps they would never get their moment. Or perhaps one day everything would fall silent and only their voice would remain. She walked back across the field, boots scuffing against the concrete. There were no banners waiting, no applause, just the knowledge that when it counted, she had flown and the sky had remembered.